Hello, Becky. Welcome to the Retro Next podcast.
Hi, Laura. I am so happy to be here.
So happy to have you back. So today we're talking all things orcs, which is a super niche of a monster, alien, otherworldly, paranormal romance. So niche, but it's a large group of books. And you're my resident orc expert. Who would have thought that that's your topics? Tell us what you've been up to since we last spoke.
Well, since you asked, but first of all, happy Orktober.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
It's Orktober. What I've been up to. Yeah, I've just been working on my podcast, Too Stupid to Live. And all last month, I got my orc assignment from you, and I was just knee deep. I was knee deep in a lot of books because I do have like my go-to orc authors, and I was like, I need to expand. So September was all about just expanding, discovering new orc authors, discovering new orc worlds, and I have to say it was one of my better reading months. I mean, except for the ones on my podcast, they're great. Yeah, no, but you know what I mean.
Oh my
Personally,
god. I am so glad that the reading assignment actually worked well and that you're just like had a pleasant, good reading mod. Because sometimes it can be a toss up. Sometimes it can be like, oh my gosh, what the heck am I reading?
yeah, it's like I love orcs. I love orcs, but like I don't know if you're the same way, but like you have a craving for a certain kind of book, and you just stick to the authors that. And sometimes, like when you're doing it personally, and it's not for like a podcast or for a show, you're kind of just sticking to that same author, and it does like you do have to be like, "Oh, wait, there are other authors out there." And I think that and which is the to say the very least. So it was, like, really nice to force myself to kind of just really explore what was out there.
Yes. So talk to us about orcs. What are orcs? First things first, let's define them. And then let's talk about like what do you love about the genre?
Sure, yeah. So orcs, it's actually very interesting, and I think a lot of people originally kind of associate orcs with Lord of the Rings. They're kind of the minions for kind of the villains in Lord of the Rings. I think a lot of people associate them with, like, kind of video games, like, I think it's Baldur's Gate or, like, War of Warcraft, so they're just, like, kind of things you fight as you're playing. But I did realize that orcs are brought up, like, in, like, the tale of Beowulf and Grendel and stuff. Like, people thought I think Grendel was described in kind of, like, using the old Middle English kind of thing, like, as an orc. So, it is very interesting about, like, well, like, the origin of the origin this I'm not gonna do this, origin of orcs. So, for me, my own fascination came with orcs from watching Lord of the Rings, just because they were just these, like, nameless cogs in the evil villain's machine. They were just kinda there, and, like, I don't know if you spend a lot of time just sitting silently while someone you have a crush on is playing video games and you're just watching, but that was, like, the majority of my teenage and college years, and so just watching these just, like, watching, like, guys I have crushes on, like, just, like, fight orcs, and they're just, like, fighting this orc to get to the next level. These orcs were so nameless, and so, like, they're just there kind of just to not really, like, just be the thwart. Like, it's like that they're nameless, they have no, like, purpose. I don't know, there was just something very fascinating about it. So, when I discovered that, like, romance authors were kind of incorporated like, we're making these monsters in particular the romantic lead, I was like, "This is fascinating."
Yes. And so what was your first orc book? Do you remember?
Yeah, my first orc book actually was Ruby Dixon. She has a standalone orc book called The Half Orc's Maiden Bride. And I don't know if there's any other in the series, but I had read Ruby Dixon from Ice Planet Barbarians, and I had a friend who also loved that book, and she recommended, oh, Ruby Dixon has a book. So that was kind of like my first foray into like orc world and just how like sexually fluid and open and unashamed they are.
Yes. And so talk to us about what can you expect with like reading some of the works? And it may shift between authors and ways that they look at it. But are there any common themes that we can see from orc books that you may notice by reading a bunch of them?
Yeah, like, so there are, like, different types of, like, monster romances. You've got your sweet, you've got your dark, but I feel like there's a lot of relatability in terms of, like, orcs have strong cultural roots, and, like, I think in a lot of these books, like, are dealing with this, like, orc kind of struggling to not struggling, but just this inner conflict of adapting to modern times, adapting to their human love interest versus honoring their parents and familial ancestry. So I think in like across all of the genres, you kind of see that. You have like things about like acceptance and interspecies dating, which I think is a one-to-one these with today's times of just finding your identity and just like going off on your own and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the recommendations. You have a couple books to recommend to get started. We're not giving you the full list. The full list is available on the blog and the Substacks, but just be on the lookout. But let's just give us a teaser. What should we get? What do you recommend to get started with the orcs?
Sure. Well, there's everything, like, there's anything and everything. I think that you can, if you want to start off with something sweet, I do love the Honey Phillips Single Mom and the Orc. I think it's called Sweet Monster Treats. I think that's the series, but I just, if you love a grumpy sunshine and you like the grumpy, like falling immediately in love with an adorable, innocent baby, like an orc in that like role is so fantastic. I like don't usually seek out the idea of like, oh, the guy is suddenly bonding with this baby and blah 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 blah. But then like all of a sudden, just reading this orc protective of this innocent, adorable little baby, I was like, now I see the appeal of the genre with humans.
Love it.
Wait,
There. So you're like, okay, I'm better than the men right now.
exactly, yeah, and I mean, I just think maybe it does have to do with, like, kind of the look of an orc, like, orcs, I think, are in the narrative, like, are described as ugly and
Yeah.
are, like, very just, like, the most monstrous, and so I think just the dichotomy of seeing something that, like, maybe we as in, like, our narrative shows as something that's the most dangerous, just cradling a baby, just I don't know. Not that I'm ever gonna have kids anytime soon, but I did feel my ovaries warm up a little bit, not gonna lie.
Well, there we go. We got a single mom and an orc. A friend
Mhm.
mom who works two jobs and an orc.
Sweet. Man, she had so many jobs, had to fix up this thing, like
Yeah.
it was just it's funny because like, the storylines of okay, why does, like, this child's childhood have to be complete with 2 parents? That I'm always like, "Ugh."
Yeah.
But this book worked. This it didn't really kind of, like, delve into kind of the societal implications of that plot line.
There we go. Awesome.
Yeah.
What's your next recommendation?
Well, my next recommendation was gonna be Forged by Magic, which I know Francesca recommended on your stream yesterday, I think.
Yes.
I was gonna recommend it because it does feature a female orc, and I do find I could be wrong, but just, like, in terms of it's hard to find, like, a female orc lead and, like, a
Yes.
human man. I think that's something I don't know, it just is what it is, and so I saw that, and it was kind of, like, the closest. I thought it was such a cute book, but I will say I will replace that just to give you an option just so we're not repeating recommendations. Orc Bots by Emma Allison. I just started this series. It's very interesting, and now it doesn't feature an orc female lead, but I'm hoping one day it does because this book does introduce a lot of awesome female orcs in their culture, and they have this little community, and, like, it was just, like it was almost like I wanted to like, I mean, I wanted, like, a Golden Girls style sitcom with, like, the female orcs in that book and just, like, see that as a TV show because it was just there was a sisterhood of orcs, and I was like, "Yeah."
I am excited to try this one for sure. I'm like, okay, you got Sister of Orcs and you got like hopefully a series so you can just dive into it. So
Exactly, yeah. I mean, granted, they are side characters. The main plot point is kind of a heterosexual love story. It's this future dystopia. You got that going on, but for some reason, I was like, "I love these lady orcs and how they all support each other."
that's
But they're still so, like, gruff and, like, prone to anger. They're still very much like their monster selves, but they're also like, "You're my best friend. I support everything you do. Huh, huh, huh. Swords." Like, it's just, like, it's perfect. It's just perfect.
yes. Awesome.
Um, okay, so Finley Fenn, I think, was the first kind of after I read the Ruby Dixon book, my friend then recommended Finley Fenn, and then that kind of was like, "Oh, this is the author for me." When I would want an orc book, I would read one of the Orc Sworn series. So, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't recommend my favorite Finley Fenn book, which is The Duchess and the Orc. I reread it last week and, like, I'm, like was in tears on my couch because just there's like a there's like a mental health representation in here, which I feel like it's very interesting to kind of see how mental health and neurodiversity has been portrayed in fantasy novels. And I felt that this book was really gutsy in the fact that like you have this female main character who's like accused of being like hysterical, whatever that means. But at the same time, it's also clear that she has very like relatable mental health issues. And seeing like Orc Mountain, being able to understand that this is a health issue, you're accepted, all that stuff. Just seeing like an orc just tell a woman with anxiety that she's perfect just the way she is, I'm like, this is a fantasy come true. Like it was just
No, that's awesome.
it's so and it's so funny because like like I do people consider that world that to be more I was gonna say dark romance or dark fantasy,
Yeah.
um, which it is. I think there is a lot of heavy themes. There's trigger warnings and things like that. But at the same time, I just like felt that one moment where just this woman being accepted for all of her flaws after everything she's been through. And he's saying it in like his orc voice of just like, my little puppet is perfect. Just like, oh, beautiful.
Oh my gosh, I'm adding this one for sure. Like, you're
Yeah.
just adding more and more books for me to read, which is
Oh, I
great. It's
know.
the whole purpose.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes when I go on these things, like half the time it's me just like writing down book title. I'm just like, what's that book?
Yeah.
I know that you like your mafia romance, so there is an orc mafia in
Awesome.
Baltimore.
Oh my gosh.
Don't worry. No, it's actually I would it's mafia boss adjacent. Do you
Yeah.
consider in your mafia books like if it's someone who is in the mafia and they're trying to leave and it's the story of them defecting, like does that still
Yeah.
fall into okay, then
Because
this is
it's
mafia romance.
once you're in the family, you're always in the family.
I mean, you don't need to tell me that. I know. But basically, it's called Orc Boss, and it's about this very, like I listened to the audiobook or did I? Yes, I did. I listened to the audiobook, and it's a Scottish orc, so he has a very sexy, like, Scottish accent, so I do recommend the audiobook. But he's, like, trying to kind of get revenge for what the main crime family, like, did to his family, a woman who I related to or it was a Fey woman actually who I related to too much, just gets caught up in the action. You do have your accidental kidnapping, you're kind of towing the line with kind of the mafia tropes, but I do think if you like a mafia romance, it's very funny and it's very palatable for the kidnapping trope. I think, like, so yeah.
I am adding this, and there is sort of just some mafia. You had me at that. Is
Mhm.
there kidnapping or potential kidnapping?
So it is a kidnapping, like if
We ain't going there.
okay. If Orc were technically on trial, like if I were a lawyer on the prosecution side, it would legally be a kidnapping. But on the
Oh,
defense's side, once you get to know their story, it's like, well, I see why he had to do that. It was just, you just have
yes.
to understand. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Especially Captain Captor or just loosely Captain Captor romance. I love them so much. I would not have that. I don't wish it upon myself or others around me. But
Mm,
in a romance, it's just so juicy and delicious and just fun and tension. You're like,
yeah.
you're not supposed to like them. And then you're just like, oh, but maybe they're treating me better than the other people in my life.
Yeah. Like, she's going through this horrible breakup and she can't get over it. And I think that's one thing I related to of just like just being so mad at yourself that you can't get over an ex. And she's like dealing with that. And then is like literally kidnapped by an orc who's treating her way better. And just seeing her, I'm like, this is great. I love this. I love this. This is
Just great. Love these recommendations. So,
yeah.
any other or
Yeah, right now I am working my way through Girls Weekend by CM Costa. That's kind of takes place in the world of Morning Glory Milking Farm. It's about three elf best friends who go to an orc nudist resort just to get laid, but they all end up meeting their kind of potential, what's going to be their potential soulmate, I'm assuming. It's really interesting because the book has three protagonists. So it's like three different
Yeah.
love stories, and it's like a series of four books. I don't think the fourth one's out yet. So I'm finishing up this third book, and you are kind of like seeing the evolution of these relationships and these like elf women trying to discover their identities. And also, like, it's a good story again about female friendship. You are more fascinated in their character growth than like kind of the sex of it all, which is there and it's sexy and it's hot and it's good. But I'm just like, again, it felt like it was like reading like it was like Broad City or like
Yeah.
Insecure, those TV shows, except it was like elves and orcs and they're in this adorable town just having the most amazing sex of all time.
I am excited. I have this on audio, I think. So I should definitely bump it up. I think that you have me a female friendships and just kind of like the evolution of the relationship as you go through the series. Sometimes
Mhm.
you need a series to deep dive and just like read them and just be in that world and be best friends with those characters and never letting them go. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're like honestly like oddly more relatable as humans because, like, I think when we were talking earlier about having to do, like, adult stuff and before we started recording and, like, they set out on this, like, having they set on their journey having, like, certain expectations, and those expectations are met, but they're not fully satisfied, and I think that's such an adult kind of journey when it's like you finally have freedom to, like, go accomplish your dreams, get what you want, only to realize like, "Oh, that wasn't for me." And I was like, "Oh, yeah. There's good life lessons in there."
Yeah. There's some life lessons. Becky, talk to us about your podcast.
Yeah, so my podcast is called Too Stupid to Live. I review romance novels $5 and under, usually. The weirder, the better, of course. But I also have special episodes where I chat with your favorite and soon to be favorite authors. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun. If you just want to hear me and some very intriguing and hilarious guests just talk about all kinds of romance novels, I definitely recommend it.
Awesome. Becky, tell us where you can find you online.
Yeah, so the podcast itself is on all of the social medias at TSTL Podcast. And I'm on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, which I guess is all of the social medias, at Beckles212.
Awesome, Becky. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.